Hello and welcome to Knitting on the Lake. My name is Kelly and I am your host. Today we are going to begin a three-part series about test knitting. And I want to address test knitting from the perspective of a test knitter, as well as someone who is relatively new to test knitting, although I have done it several times already. We're going to have a three-part series about test knitting. So depending on when you're seeing this video, those videos all may exist on YouTube already. I will be sure to update the show notes with the links to the subsequent two other videos to this one. So the first in this series is going to be focused on what is a test knitting, why you might want to apply for a test knit, and the reasons why maybe you might not want to apply for a test knit. The second part of this series is going to be focused on those green and red flags to look for when you are considering whether to apply for a test knit, as well as logistically just how to find test calls and how to apply and give yourself the best chance of securing a spot if that is something that you want to do. And then the third episode, I really need your help. I'm pre-recording the first two episodes now, so you'll notice that I'm wearing the same thing. I'm actually going to put them out together as well so that you can watch both videos in the series back to back if you like. But for the third episode, I really want to hear from you because I would like to talk about hot topics related to test knitting. Now, some of these topics may be teased a little bit in the first two episodes of this series, but there are things that are on my mind, but there may be a lot of other things that are not, that you have questions about or you want to hear addressed. So I would love to get your comments in the show notes. Again, there are links to the other videos, and please just ask your questions, and I will be sure to address them, and I will keep everyone anonymous unless you specifically state that you would like your name attached to it. You can always direct message me as well if it's not something that you want to put in a comment section. Another way to message me is via Instagram. My handle is Knitting on the Lake. It's at Knitting on the Lake, just like my YouTube channel. So getting back to the fact that I am wearing the same thing in both of these first two videos, there is a reason why I'm wearing this, and it's not because I really like to match my my set and my background, although I am doing that pretty well today, I would say. This is a vest that I made as my very first test knit back in, I don't know, probably around this time last year. This is the Vineyard Breeze vest, and the designer of this pattern is Dunn Smith, and she is Birch Tree Knits and Birch Tree Knitting on Instagram. So although I did my first test knit a year ago, I have subsequently test knit for several designers, I think probably 12 or 13 of them, and I've done over 20 test knits total. So I have quite a bit of experience participating in test knits, also just looking at test calls and considering whether or not I would like to participate. I've seen a lot of different ways of doing this, and I just kind of want to share my thoughts and my opinions, and because I think it would have been helpful for me when I was starting to think about doing this, becoming a test knitter. I think I would have kind of found this information helpful back then and wish that I knew then what I know now. But hey, that's part of life and part of learning, right? All right, so first of all, let's just get going with the very, very basic question of what is test knitting. So test knitting is a process by which a knitwear designer or crochet designer or a sewist, pattern maker person. I'm not a sewist, so I cannot speak to anything related to that. Strictly gonna just talk about knitting. They have developed a pattern that they want to release for sale somewhere, their website, their on Ravelry, or perhaps they're designing for a yarn manufacturer or another type of company. But the idea is that, especially for garments, but really for all type of patterns, whether it's an accessory, garment, or otherwise, making sure that the pattern is accurate when it's released, and that all sizes have sort of been tested, as to the degree possible, to make sure that the pattern that goes out for sale is as devoid of errors as possible and gives knitters who purchase the pattern the best experience possible when they are making that object. And in today's day and age, test knitting, I think, is really, really important because there's so many ways that designers can be contacted online, through social media, through email, and there's a lot more opportunities now than like in the days of knitting magazines and printed errata that you would get with those. Like, there's just a really high potential for a lot of questions to come up. So the extent to which a designer can minimize that inflow of questions and problems, the more happy they're going to be and the more successful they're going to be in selling their pattern. So what are the reasons why you might want to consider test knitting? Perhaps you really enjoy working with designers, or you want to work with a specific designer. Maybe you're like a big fan of some designer out there and you want to really get in there and explore. I think test knitting can be a great opportunity to do that. I am an interior designer by trade, and so part of the interest for me in test knitting really is kind of getting underneath the process a little bit and understanding how a designer works, and just getting exposed to that part of the process versus just getting the like fully fledged pattern. I think can be really appealing for some people. Another benefit of test knitting is that, generally speaking, you're getting the pattern that is being tested for free. And usually, obviously when it comes through in testing, you're getting it in draft form, and at the completion of the test knit, typically the designer will provide the final version of the pattern to everyone who tested. And so then you can always have that in your library and didn't cost you a thing. Another reason you might want to consider test knitting is if you're curious about the process of pattern development and how it works. This is kind of related to, wanting to, enjoying working with designers or creatives. Just the curiosity of wanting to learn more about how the process works. Test knitting is a really good way to get more exposure to that side of things. If you are the type of person who is an early adopter and you like to be the first in on new things, whether it's technology or fashion, this might be appealing to you to kind of be one of the first to knit a particular pattern. That could be one of the things that motivates you to participate in a test knit. And likewise, if you are the kind of person that likes to kind of get into the weeds on a process and kick the tires on something, if you like to proofread and edit and look at things with a critical eye, Test knitting is a process where you can kind of flex those desires and those skills that you might have. Another great benefit of test knitting can be, just challenging yourself to explore different techniques or, making things that you maybe otherwise would not have made. It can be a way to challenge yourself and really develop and grow your skill set as a knitter. A lot of times when you sign up for a test knit, you don't exactly know all the details of how it works, and you may come across things that you've never done before, and that's only going to help you grow and again, build your skill set as a knitter. Another thing that can be beneficial or could be a drawback depending on how you look at it is having a deadline. A lot of people find it really helpful to have a deadline when they are, planning out their projects or, deciding to make a project. It can help provide the motivation to get to the finish line. If you're the kind of person who has a hard time, getting to the finish line on your projects that you are doing of your own volition and, just buying paid patterns, it might be a good opportunity or a good way to find out if this is something that could help you, increase your productivity if that is something that you're interested in doing as a knitter. Depending on who you are test knitting for, there is also the possibility and the opportunity to sort of elevate your presence on social media by participating in test knits. And this really depends on the designer that you would be test knitting for, as well as, any yarn company or other collaborator that they may be working with. Being a part of a big pattern launch with a big designer can really amplify your social media presence. So if that's something that you're interested in kind of growing and developing, if that's something that's important to you, then signing up for certain test knits with certain designers can really give you a boost in that category. Another thing that I don't think gets talked about very much with respect to test knits is the fact that when you sign up for a test knit, you are kind of also receiving a different level of pattern support. Now, granted, it may be support that is needed because there are errors or there's some sort of confusion in the pattern, but it is really nice to have the direct line to the designer and know that it's to their advantage to be very responsive to you and to help you ensure that you have a successful result with whatever you are test knitting on their behalf. So having that sort of direct line and that pattern support throughout the process as you work on a test knit project can be a really big benefit as well. With some test knits, there is the possibility of really making new friends and developing a community. Some designers seem to run test knits almost like a knit along or a make along, where there's a lot of chit chat on whatever forum they have chosen to host their test knit. There's a possibility to, grow your community and make some friends along the way as you are going through this process. So it can be something fun if you want to look out for those designers who may be doing it that way. That can be a really big check mark in the pro column for test knitting as well. And you could potentially learn a lot through the comments and the questions that other knitters have. The last reason I wanted to talk about, I'm sure there's many others, but that you may want to sign up for a test knit is that you are an aspiring designer. So if you have thoughts or designs on becoming a knitwear designer, I think it is absolutely critical to do test knitting, as it is to, knit a variety of projects. It's really good, as you are developing your repertoire, to really get exposed to different ways that designers run these processes, different ways in which designers are writing their patterns, to see all the things that if you were to become a designer, that you might want to incorporate into your test knitting process, what you might not want to incorporate into your test knitting process, and just really getting into the weeds on everything that you would need to know as you embark upon that journey. All right, so let's talk about the disadvantages of test knitting. Why might you want to think twice about signing up for that test knit? It's like this cool thing, everyone seems to be doing it. You see all these people on social media posting their test knit reveals when a designer launches a new pattern. So what are the things that might give you pause? So one thing to consider is the fact that the pattern is in draft form, and you don't know exactly what you're going to get. You may be getting this pattern for free, but there's a reason why you're getting it for free. It's not because it's out of the goodness of the designer's heart. It is because it is not finished. It is in draft form, and part of your job, because it really is a job. If you think about it, you're signing up to do a job on behalf of that designer. You want to make sure that you know what you have signed up for. And this pattern may be like locked and loaded. You may get to you in a form where you literally have no comments. It is like absolutely perfect and ready to publish. Or you may get a pattern that is riddled with confusing language, with numerical errors. There could be stitch counts that are wrong, directions that are mislabeled, chart errors, incorrect yardage estimates, and just plain missing information. And ask me how I know on any of these things, because I think they've literally all happened to me in one test knit or another. So if you're not the kind of person that can deal with having to navigate some of those errors and working with a designer to try and kind of hammer things out, then test knitting may not be for you. A really important consideration if you are thinking about test knitting a garment is that there's a very good chance that your size has not yet been knit. And part of your job is to kind of be the guinea pig that makes that size for the first time and figures out if there's any issues with the way that the pattern has been graded. A lot of times when the test call goes out, there's a prototype. It may be in progress, it may be already finished, but it's probably in the designer's size, whatever size they may be. And then all the other sizes have been graded out, and hopefully there's no errors, but that is part of why the testing process happens. So just bearing in mind that your size is potentially something that is like unexplored territory when it comes to this pattern. Something that I mentioned in the pro column could also be a con, depending on how you look at it, which is that there are deadlines when it comes to test knittings, and the deadlines may not always work in your favor. There are plenty of test knits that have very luxurious deadlines. There are also those that are a little more aggressive and have a tighter timeline. But regardless of that, there's a lot of potential for you to get into a project thinking that you have enough time, and then as you got into it, realizing that it's actually going to take you a lot more time than you thought. And then it might create a stressful situation where you feel pressure to knit something, and then it's taking all the fun out of your relaxing hobby. So, if you're a person that really cares about managing your balance and your mood, the deadline aspect of test knitting is something that you really might want to think about before you commit. Something else to consider that is a potential drawback is that when you sign up for a test knit, if you are not familiar with that designer, with the way that they write patterns and the way, the layout and the formatting, you may get into the test knit and realize that you really don't enjoy, or you're not vibing with the way that that designer is presenting the information. And this can be a really big deal for some people, and it could be completely like nothing for others. I know for me personally, I can get easily overwhelmed if the information in a pattern is presented in a way that I don't think is very well organized and logical, and with adequate spacing and clarity around the different instructions for different sizes. If it contains too much information, I can often get overwhelmed. I don't want to talk too much about my own personal experiences, but just to kind of illustrate the example of, that you may get into it and find out, ooh, like I can't really like look at this. It's kind of making my eyes go crossed, and I'm not going to enjoy this process potentially. So just something to consider when you are thinking about applying for a test knit. Another thing to think about is that when you are applying for a test knit, you're getting a certain amount of information. And that is like a subset of the information that you'll ultimately receive when you get the pattern, if you are selected to participate in the test knit. And the information that is advertised may not be complete. And so when you receive the pattern, you've already committed to doing it, and there may be some specifics with the pattern or the way that the finished object is going to turn out that were surprising to you, that you didn't really expect or didn't know about in advance, that if you had known about them, you may have made another choice. So that is also something to think about, that you may not have all the information available to you. So some flexibility is really needed, because you're not going to have 100% knowledge of what you're getting when you do sign up. A lot of knitting patterns are made, well in advance of when they are set to launch, according to whatever the designer's calendar looks like or whatever their plans are. And so you may find yourself knitting something very much out of season when you do a test knit, because if they have something that they want to launch, say in the fall timeframe, that pattern is going to be tested probably in the summertime. So it may be, a thick woolly sweater that you are knitting in like the dog days of August. And so you may be fine with that, or that may be a real problem for you. So really something to think about when you're assessing those opportunities. If you are really focused on social media, or very active there with your knitting content, something that you should consider is how important it is to you to share the information and the pictures of the things that you're working on. Some test knits can be very secretive, and the designer will surely communicate to you the level of secrecy, whether you can post progress shots, whether you can post the finished object in advance of the pattern launching, or if you have to post on a specific date that is coordinated with the pattern launch. there may be a lot of control that you lose over your own content when you're participating in a test knit. Even the ability to wear your finished object could be effectively embargoed until the pattern launches with the most secret test knits for kind of the most high profile designers. So it's something to think about. I don't think, none of these things are necessarily a deal breaker. I'm just sharing different things that you may want to consider that may or may not be important to you. And social media is one of those things that, people have different opinions on and different needs related to that. So just another thing to consider. My last sort of thing to watch out for would be that when you sign up for a test knit, it can obviously kind of preclude you from working on other things that may, be appealing to you. Just something to keep in mind is that when you sign up for a test knit, it does have that deadline, and you are essentially going to have to prioritize that over other projects that you may be working on just for yourself. So it's something to think about if you are a person who likes to keep their options open, or you don't want to be tied down by any one thing, or feel like you have some sort of responsibility that's keeping you from doing other things that you love. With respect to knitting, then test knitting may not be the process for you. It's just something to think about. And again, remember that test knits can take more time than what you may think when you set out on one of these projects. All right, next we're going to talk about how to find test knits. And nowadays, mostly test knits are advertised online, and with a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of legwork, they're not hard to find. One way to find test calls from designers is to follow the designers that you like on social media and sign up for their newsletters, their email newsletters. I think more and more these days, designers seem to be doing more with their email newsletters. They may be kind of advertising these test calls in both places, but with a lot of the, shifting that's happening in social media and, people kind of using different platforms or, potentially abandoning platforms for political reasons or any other reason, signing up for the email newsletters is a really good way to keep abreast of what's going on. So connecting with those designers whose work you admire and might want to knit, connecting with them directly is a really good approach and a great way to find test calls in a really targeted way, because you already know that those are the designers that you like, and that you admire and might want to work with. There are also some test-specific accounts on Instagram and other places on social media. The one that I am most familiar with is called Fat Test Knits, and the Instagram handle is @FatTestKnits. And so this is an account that focuses on size inclusive patterns, and so you don't need to be in a 5XL or 6XL or one of those larger sizes in order to find information that is helpful to you. It's really just about patterns that are size inclusive, so ranging from 30-inch bust to 60-inch bust or above would be considered size inclusive. Designers will partner with Fat Test Knits to feature their content for, I'm sure, a certain fee, And so that's one way that they can recruit test knitters to their projects. There's also a lot you can find by searching on hashtags that are specific to test knitting. You can look for those hashtags on test calls that you come across, but there's a few that kind of stand out that you can probably find the most information on. Hashtags like test knitters wanted, testing call, test knitting can be really good places to look, and on Instagram, on Twitter or X, and Threads are the places that I would look for that. There are also websites that are kind of set up to connect designers with potential test knitters. So designers can sign up to feature their test knits, and test knitters can create an account and browse all the test knitting opportunities that are going on at any given time on the website. The one that I have used, and that seems like the most commonly used, is called Yarn Pond, and it's yarnpond.com. And I have done a few different test knits on Yarn Pond, and there's a pretty big range on that website of types of patterns, of the level of experience of designers. Some of them are brand new designers trying to get testers for their first pattern. Others are very experienced designers who maybe just don't have as big of a social media profile or presence that need a little extra help to recruit test knitters. There's a lot of people that fill their tests right up because they're showing a great pattern and that people are really interested in. And then there's other tests that sort of sit there and don't generate a lot of interest because maybe they just are not hitting the right notes for the people in that community. But anyway, the Yarn Pond website is a good place to look. There are also a couple of groups in Ravelry that are focused on test knitting. One is called Testing Pool, and the other is called Free Pattern Testers. And they sort of are what they sound like. It's a message board. It's like in the forum format of Ravelry. If you're familiar with what that looks, it looks kind of like a pretty dated visual, like message board discussion forum. But it's a place where you can get the information you need to decide if you want to apply for a test knit or not. All right, so how do you go about getting selected for a test knit? Some test knits are very easy to sign up for. Again, if it's a newer designer or a pattern that's maybe a little less appealing to the masses, but it appeals to you, it may not be a competitive process to get the opportunity to test knit. But with designers that have a really high profile, are very popular, have been around for a really long time, those test knit processes can be very competitive and very difficult to secure those opportunities. So you apply, but there's not a guarantee that you're going to be selected by the designer. So what are the things that you can do to increase your chances of getting selected if that is something you want to do? One thing that I think is really important right now is developing your knitting portfolio. So obviously it's physically developing a portfolio of your work through your actual knitting, but the other piece of that is documenting that and making it public online, whether that is on Ravelry, on Instagram, some combination of both. It's really important for a designer who is considering you for a test knit to see the breadth of your work, the experience that you have, to be able to see if you have experience with that particular technique or aspect of the the pattern that they are looking for testers for. So is it brioche? Like, do you have any brioche projects on your portfolio? Do you have stranded color work if you're applying for a, Fair Isle sweater test knit? Have you ever steeked before? These are the kind of things that designers are looking for. Like, does this person have experience in what I'm going to need them to do? Or is it going to be difficult to work with them? Am I going to need to do a lot of hand holding? Those are the kind of things that they're thinking about when they're, considering who to accept into their testing pool. Another thing to think about is that just with respect to the competitive nature of these test knits, or some of these test knits, is that certain sizes are going to be, of garments, are going to be more contentious than others, are going to be more competitive. So the small, medium, and large sizes, whatever those might be in terms of bust circumference, those are going to be the most popular, the most often requested. And sizes like extra small and XL through 6XL, or whatever it ends up being on the upper end of the bust circumference range, those are going to be a little bit less competitive. So I wouldn't suggest that you offer to make a size that's not going to fit you. That is definitely not a good idea. But it's just something that I think it's important to consider, that if you go to sign up for a test knit and you don't get it, it could be that 30 people applied to make a size 2 and the designer only needs 3 test knitters for that size. So a lot of people are going to, get a message that says thank you, but no thank you. And that's just something you have to keep in mind. But, again, the way you can set yourself apart is by just showing your work in the best light possible, taking really good pictures of the finished object, taking modeled pictures so that the designer can see, how the things that you have made fit you. Are you successfully making things that fit and that look great on you? Are you exploring different yarns, different colors? They just want the confidence that that you're going to help them with what they need help with, which is test knitting their pattern, getting feedback, and making their pattern as good as it can possibly be when they put it up for sale to the general public. The other way to get selected for a test knit is to apply. So you never know. You may think, oh, I could never, I'm sure I would never get selected to test knit for this designer because, it's so competitive and I'm sure everyone else is applying. You just apply. If you want to apply. You never know. And designers are, the big designers definitely seem to have their favorites and the people that seem to test for them over and over again. But there are always opportunities to get in as a newcomer into those tight circles. And I think designers try to have at least some new testers in on every process because they want to make sure that they're getting a breadth of points of view and different feedback. Different sets of eyes on their pattern can only benefit them. Obviously, if you're a new tester and then it doesn't go well, you're probably not going to get into that inner circle. But when you're first applying and you're starting out, don't be afraid, just try. I've definitely been rejected by a number of designers for different test calls, but I've also been selected for ones that I really never expected to. And I've been a part of, pattern releases that were really, really high profile that I just really never dreamed that, someone like me who's pretty new to test knitting in terms of time spent. I didn't really think that I would ever get selected. So the best way to get selected for a test knit is to try. All right, so that is everything I have for you for this first episode. The second episode, again, is going to be one you don't want to miss because it's going to be about those red flags and green flags about test knits that you're going to want to look for. And we're going to get a lot more specific than we did in this episode. So if you are thinking about test knitting, or even if you are a test knitter with some experience, I think that this next episode is going to be very interesting, hopefully as comprehensive as it could possibly be. And again, that third episode, I have not filmed it. I'm not filming it today, but I would love your feedback on hot topics in test knitting. Please share any questions that you have with me via direct message or in the comments below, and I will try to address your comments and questions in my hot topics episode. If you are interested in seeing my knitting portfolio, I have that on my Ravelry page, and it is at KM Rogers. That's K as in Kelly, M as in Marie. Rogers is Rogers. And on Instagram, I am posting most of my projects and a lot more works in progress and other things. And my handle there is Knitting on the Lake, which I mentioned earlier, all one word together and same as the name of this channel. So thanks so much for joining me. I hope that you will check out the second in this series on test knitting, and you can find the link to it in the show notes below. It will be posted at the same time as this one. Thanks again, and I wish you happy knitting, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.